So this is episode 4 of our webcast, our Why Am I Doing This webcast. Mm-hmm. You are Matt Candler, and you are, what do you go by? How should we refer to you? As the founder of 4.0 Schools?
Yeah, sure.
We
call them, they call me founder and CEO.
Both.
So depending on the day. Sometimes I pick one or the other depending on whether it gives me more leeway to
what the ecosystem is.
Yeah, or whether it's like a really bad mistake that I made, then I can say I was the founder, and then that sounds So, yeah, those are two of the titles I use. Yeah,
there's a lot of interesting stuff about 4.0 that I think is like worth jumping in or worth kind of diving into. Could you give us like a brief, high-level overview of maybe the conception of 4.0 and what launched it? And then do the fast forward to kind of what it is today, because I know it's something that really is profoundly different from what it was when it was founded.
Totally. So I facilitated our Essentials Camp last week, the Mad Lib portion of it, where you define the problem that you're interested in solving or the community you're interested in serving, and then you fill out this Mad Lib, like blank has a problem, and I think I could solve that by doing blank, so I'm going to test blank. Mm-hmm. And a couple years ago, someone challenged me to do that for 4.0. So I actually wrote a blog post about all the versions of Mad Libs of 4.0. So the first Mad Lib of 4.0 we wrote in 2010, December 2010 was when we started. And the Mad Lib roughly went like this. Founders of new types of charter schools in the Southeast need a place to launch. So 4.0 will be that place.
The launch pad.
That's right. So it was it wasn't very innovative because it was based on the idea that opening a charter school would be how you express yourself. Mm-hmm. In the Southeast would be where, and the concept of that school being disruptive or new or different was not really a big part of it. So, the first year and a half of 4.0 was trying to build something I had built many times before, an incubator for charters, but this time it was instead of being focused on a particular type of school, like what I had worked on at KIPP, or what a particular city like New York or New Orleans. It was, we'll just let anyone in the Southeast come participate. So it was like not very interesting, to be honest.
No kidding.
Yeah, we raised a bunch of money for it, and we had 6 people in that first cohort, 3 of whom were going to launch schools in Tennessee, 2 in New Orleans. 1 in New Orleans, and 1 was an ed tech startup, and the other was maybe a school, maybe a program.
Were you even thinking about what innovation meant then, or was it the case that you just wanted to grow and incubate schools?
I think it read as we want to grow and incubate schools, but you know what? Deep inside of me, what was really happening is I wanted to be anything but what I had been or what I saw the movement being. So there was like this 2 or 3 year period that was really scary when you look back on it, that I was defining 4.0 by what I didn't want it to be.
What was it that you were reacting to?
I was reacting to this habit we had in the movement at that point of blessing a particular school model and saying this will be perfect for all kids, so we will scale it up. So there was this. Tragically, this is still very much the case in the movement, that there's the idea of maximizing as many kids in seats under a particular model as possible, ignoring all of the nuances of local community, ignoring the specifics of whether a particular family or student will thrive there. Mm-hmm. And I think from a strategic perspective, ignoring what a comprehensive, thoughtful citywide strategy would be. That a citywide strategy of amazing solutions for all families would be rooted in the idea of diversity and options, and constantly offering new ideas. And I think there was a big push in those years to say, literally I heard folks funders say, you know what, I've invested in KIPP and in Teach for America. What else? Why would I need to invest in anything else?
No kidding.
And that's the level of thought that was going into philanthropy and into policy making and into the science. There was no science, into what we were calling innovation at the time.
Interesting.
And so I was part of that. Like I was totally bought into that, and I counted myself as, a renegade because I was just saying, well, let's just be regional about it. Like it's mind-numbing that I saw myself as an innovator.
How it felt big, but at the time...
I look back, I'm like, that you were as uninteresting and as unoriginal and as, colonial in your thinking. You were as wrapped in the power dynamics of white supremacy and race that have defined school in our country. You did not unpack very much.
It was a tangential move instead of like totally breaking away from.
Totally. So like in Clayton Christian's language, it was at best an evolutionary innovation, not a disruptive one.
Was it your career up until that point? You weren't bad at what you did.
No, I wasn't.
You were good at what you did.
I was good at what I did. I had the pleasure and the total gift of getting to work at KIPP, and I was the head of school expansion. And you could argue that we were the only model that ever really scaled nationally.
Sure.
We blew a bunch of decisions.
Mm-hmm.
We negotiated with school districts that, in hindsight, we probably didn't give ourselves enough room to ensure the quality we want to provide. But that was all in the interest of trying to work with a superintendent or a school board that we thought was, and coming from a good place. And then
Sure.
there were other times where we didn't take the risks we could have. We would say, we're KIPP, we don't have to try anything new. And since then, I think KIPP has taken some bigger bets and gotten smarter at how to enter a new city. But at the time, I'm proud of what we did.
And it was really the defining institution at the time. There were only so many ways in which education had been funded and really scaled.
Right.
So you even breaking from that slightly must have, at least at the time, felt like it was a big jump.
It did.
Because there wasn't anything else in the ecosystem at the time.
I think that's right. And there was a lot of focus on New Orleans at the time too, right?
Yes.
It's like, this is a city where we have a chance to tell this reform story. And there was something... The way that I continue to process that chapter in my life was that I was coming to the realization that for 15 years I had been doing school reform to people and not with them. And so much of my mindset, not just when I was doing that work at KIPP, but when I was doing it prior, I was working with small, mostly parent groups around the Southeast to help them launch their own charter schools. And I was in families' homes. I was talking to them about their dreams for their kids, but in my mind, in my heart, I was convinced that I had the right answer, and it was just my job to put it in front of them, and the only logical decision would be like, amazing, I totally want that.
Yeah.
And a few things happened. We got a couple years into 4.0, and I started to understand this idea that I didn't actually have a strategy for giving anyone anything new. I had mostly come into it thinking I knew it all.
Yeah.
And that I would just give more of what I was so certain of to more people.
Was there a moment that it hit you where you fire this thing up, you think it's a revolutionary move, but it's really more incremental in hindsight? Do you have a kind of slap in the face moment where you go, hold up, I need to really reassess?
100%. It wasn't for me. Like most of the things I've learned in the last 20, 30 years have not come from my knowledge. It was Beth Heaton Sealing, who co-founded the organization with me. Mm-hmm. She was the COO at the time. And it was just the two of us, like early days. Cambria joined us about 6 months in. So we were a 3-person team.
Wow.
And we were putting charters into Tennessee. And the heat we were getting from Tennessee about these 3 models they were crazy. They'd never seen these models before, and they weren't sure that they could authorize them because they weren't proven models.
Interesting.
And Beth called it out. She was like, you know what, she and I worked together at KIPP, and she's like, look, we started this. I'll be forever grateful to her for this. She said, we started this to try something new. Granted, we're in this process of realizing that just charters is not enough. But for now, even these charters that we are trying to help people build there, those authorizers are saying they're too crazy. And so she said, look, I just don't want to do this. I don't think it's fair to us she's like, we've done this before. Like, it's Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
You know, like I feel like I'm in Groundhog Day. I remember her saying that. And what was hard about that is we sat down and we decided, this was very difficult. We looked 3 of those founders from our first cohort in the eye and said, we cannot go through with this.
How far in the process were they?
They were submitting charters.
So, which is
one of those charters. It's a big deal. This is a multi-million-dollar process. Here's another relationship thing. That first cohort, they all got a full year's salary to work with 4.0. Can you imagine? Like that was, so it was a $200,000-ish investment in salary, coaching, travel, investment in launching a school. And so we basically said to those 3 schools, we'll support you in spirit, but we know what it takes to get your school to success.
Yeah.
From here to year 3. And that's a commitment that we just can't make. So we've got to pull out.
Because of the pushback?
Because of the cost, because of our belief, and because of what the 3 of us, we don't want to do that. There are better organizations set up to do this.
I see.
And so what had happened in the meantime is that they had started to set up an infrastructure in Tennessee to provide that from Tennessee.
I see.
So there was a few things going on, like how can we do this from New Orleans, A. B, we've done it before and there are other institutions that should specialize in this.
Yeah.
And then C, like we had run a little experiment on the side. Brian Bordanik and Katie Beck, who was later the CEO of 4.0, had run a little experiment for teachers in New Orleans. Mm-hmm. And they said, look, let's just go ask them what they want to hack on in their classroom, not a school. And there was so much energy from that particular experiment that Beth and I were looking at this stuff and saying, we've got this group of people that want something that we've never provided. They don't want to quit their jobs. They just want help on this crazy little experimental thing that Brian and Katie came up with. And then we have this big, massive version of 4.0, which is going to be what we've already done and what we know that charter management organizations and other institutions can specialize in.
Giant pipeline.
That's right. We're talking 6-figure investments every time you make a bet on someone.
Sure.
Really high-risk stuff and really needs to be specialized. And local. And so we had this fork in the road, and she was like, I don't want to go down that road. I didn't know what road, and this road seems interesting. So this is a scary moment. We call our funder, who had guaranteed us $5 million out of the gate before we started.
Wow.
And said, we're not sure we want to run the business plan that we pitched you.
Wow.
And they said, okay, well, we're going to have to examine whether or not we can give you any more
money.
Viable
if it's...
Yeah, we'll get back to you. Which was kind of scary.
Yeah, how do you even start a call like that?
You just call and say, I don't think this is the right thing. We've looked, we're willing, this is what I said, we're willing to risk the company. We're willing to risk your support. Like, we don't want to lose it. We think this is the right path, but if it means losing your support, then we have to make this call.
Sure.
And then we said the same to Tennessee, and $6 million of commitments from Tennessee vanished. We pulled down less than $500,000 of that, which makes sense. Like they to their credit, they kept it and they spent it on those schools, which was the right thing to do. But yeah, that was a scary moment. Like, so that call to that funder was tough. Mm-hmm. Took them about 7 months to come back around, and they did.
Really?
They came back and supported our new strategy, and are still one of our biggest funders today.
So you say we're not going to go big anymore. We don't think we're reinventing the wheel.
That's right.
If we try to treat people as the founder who's going to launch the next mega CMO.
Yeah.
We want to do the exact opposite strategy and
we
start
want to
making moves at a local level with much smaller risk but more people.
A couple ways to think about, and then again, this is in hindsight, it sounds a lot clearer than it was. We want to make smaller bets on people. Mm-hmm. So like there's this 6-figure investment that you got to make on an idea to turn it into a public charter school, which will then be a 7-figure investment.
Sure.
And I knew lots of people who did that work, and we knew that we could do that if we wanted to and probably get tons of money to do that. But we didn't want to do that because there was this small group of people on the side who were like, hey, come over here. We have this thing we want your help with. Mm-hmm. And what was hard about that, and I continue to sort of unlearn this, right, like you were a teacher, I was a teacher, there's this piece of our identity where we were affirmed in our ability to be certain for children. It's like that's what they need from us.
As the adult in the room, as the one guiding the path.
The wise one. And like there's something very scary about that if you set too much of your expectations in that, because you know, what kids need from me and what this group of teachers needed from us was just to be curious about their thing, to just hang out with it. And I give Brian and Katie all the credit for this massive pivot in what we did. Is that both of them, two totally different personalities. You know these people. Katie is the most gifted manager I've ever met in my life. I've never seen someone so skilled at leading people and leading complex projects. I'm truly a gift to get to work with her. Brian is the most entrepreneurial, out-of-the-box, uncontrollable guy I've ever worked with. And the two of them somehow worked together to create this really special place for about 30 teachers in New Orleans.
And that was their
it was
their
just a
test.
little, it was just a little experiment.
This thing up.
And the thing is, they didn't know anything about school startup. And so Beth and I were kind of, shepherding that first cohort. And they were like, well, let us tinker around with what could be the second cohort. And so it was just dumb luck that we did this sort of side hustle experiment, which is now core to who we are.
Sure.
But I give them a lot of credit to say, hey, this thing is interesting. Listen to some of these ideas. And so it was hard for Beth and for me, who had built a lot of our career on the certainty of a school model that's going to be awesome for people, and saying, we can't do that. And that was hard and scary. So anyway, I keep thinking about how do I process that, and really what we did is we just divided the size of the investment we made by not 10 but by 100, right? Instead of making 6-figure investments in people, we said we made 4-figure investments.
Sure.
So a $5,000 or a $10,000 investment in an idea, that's where people need us to be.
What did you find? Was it like an immediate, holy smokes, this is actually happening? Was it a whole suite of problems that you had not thought of previously? After you make that big jump and you say, I'm going to, in a sense, move away from something that I've spent a lot of my career being really good at.
Yeah. And
managing these very large plans with very large dollar signs attached to them. What happened next?
It was hard. It's hard, I think, personally, right? This is when my oldest child is about to enter kindergarten. And so we're having these conversations about where our children will go. So on a personal level, what's happening is I am coming to grips with this moral dilemma where I've spent 10 years of my life in the homes of families who live in neighborhoods that are not like mine, who don't have the financial security or the same skin color as I do. And I'm selling them on a school that I'm sure is going to be awesome for their kids. And then I look at those same schools for my own kid, and I hear myself on the phone with friends running these schools saying, what if we picked our kids up early instead of staying till 5 at the school? And just seeing this reality of my own privilege play out and starting to understand, you have been, in the words of Lisa Delpit, who wrote a fascinating book called Other People's Children. I have been teaching other people's children.
And now it became real in a totally different way.
And then I have my own children, and I want something slightly different for them. And then that moral, that reality of this is your privilege, driving not just how you interact with the world, but everything you think about the people that you serve.
And you had never had to confront it in that
Not in that way. I think not until it was about my own kids. There are so many ways to trick yourself into thinking that you're doing good work, and that you're getting affirmed that you're doing good work.
People are telling you.
It's just there's collateral impact that you don't see. Right?
Sure.
There's the benefit to the children that are in your school that you're serving, and they are getting something better. But they're the hidden cost. They're the opportunity cost of that. And this is what structural racism is so good at. It is hiding us from the structural patterns that are so well ingrained that they keep us from really changing the structural stuff.
So you, after having spent a large portion of your career in education, were for the first time being confronted with
absolutely
options that the thing that you had been selling wasn't necessarily the thing that you wanted to send your own children to.
Right, and so we continue to preach choice and accountability as the pillars, just for example, of the charter movement. And I still believe in those things. I
Sure.
believe in choice. What I realized was that I was playing a sort of Henry Ford game. You know, there's the saying when Henry Ford was launching the Model T, to get the cost of the car down, he had to standardize many things. And so he'd say, you
Sure.
can have any color you want as long as it's black.
As long as it's black.
And so, because he saved paint, you know, the amount of money that Ford could save on not stocking other colors of paint, like that was sort of what was innovative for him. And we're in that same trap, right?
Where
It's
everything
like
was so standardized.
innovation, yeah, no doubt. Like and the metaphor is intentional. I'm choosing this metaphor intentionally,
Sure.
right? Because you know the conveyor belt, the basic manufacturing construct of Ford and others who drove change in the industrial age was about lowering costs and efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And we truly have created a system based on the idea that factories and schools should look the same.
An output model.
Correct.
Inputs and outputs.
Absolutely, right? And it, you know, and so I was part of that tradition. I was just selling a modern version of that. Again, this is not to take away that a particular child might benefit from that school,
Sure.
but when it transforms into, and when it comes from a space of like, I know all and I am the expert,
Who's enacting it?
and I'm choosing to not let you in, and I'm keeping the power and providing the choice to you.
Sure.
Like that's when it becomes, if not checked and challenged, sinister, because you're preaching choice, but you're not really delivering it. And I'll just name it. Like we're in a moment right now in New Orleans where it is very tempting, if you are the operator of a high quality school, to say, look, let's chill out a little bit on these new schools. Why don't you just let us run the place? Because a new school might not work, and that would be really bad for children.
Sure.
Why don't you just let the existing operators do their thing? In
It's
fact,
working. Let it expand.
in some states, this is a true thing. The proven provider, either construct and policymaking or actual law, is written to protect the incumbent charter operators who came to life as an alternative to the incumbent district.
So it's anti-innovation that
You have
followed the innovation.
This is why Christensen's theories are so powerful, is that the innovator's dilemma, there is such an incredible disincentive for the incumbent, the existing firm, to innovate, is that it just grinds innovation to a halt. Even if you defined your career as the person who came to provide options.
At some point you then become the old fogey in the room who's
That's
doing
exactly
the same
right.
thing over and over again.
And so I disagree with that. And my belief is that we have to constantly oxygenate the system with new ideas, and we have to constantly interrogate the systems that we have to invite people's ideas in. And so 4.0 has become, at least seeks to be, a place where anyone, and I mean anyone, and we're constantly interrogating that. It's not as accessible as it could be, but it's a hell of a lot more accessible than it used to be. And so as long as we're on that journey and pushing as hard as we can to say, does anyone feel comfortable starting to tell this story of how they might change school in their community? Can they feel comfortable here? That's where we're headed. That's where I want to be. And at least, specifically in New Orleans, I believe that if you let more people start and give more people the resources with a 3-figure or a 4-figure or a 5-figure check, and the support that comes with it, that absolutely the future of your landscape will be brighter. And the choices that I used to not care about providing, that I think you actually could provide in a genuinely rich environment of abundance, I absolutely think that can happen. I also believe, at least just to stick with New Orleans for a minute, we have the policy environment in place. It's just whether we will choose
follow it or not
to do that. Whether the people who are in power now will choose to share that power, or they will choose to say, we have the power now, just trust us as the new experts. That would be a tragic, tragic end to this story. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that is not the end.
To keep the dynamism, to keep
this
thing oxygenated.
Not even to keep it, to start it. So many people who live in this town would say, keep it. I've never been invited to that party once. No one has asked me one time to contribute to the dynamism.
Do you think it's really the 4.0 that you're describing now is starkly different from this initial idea of we're going to make 6-figure bets and set you up for 7-figure investments.
Right.
What you're talking about now is so grassroots. It's so foundational in a sense. It's a 0 to 1 mentality that dives directly into the ecosystem.
Right.
How do you define what is happening now? How do you contribute organizationally to that model with what 4.0 is now? What is the thing that it is now? We know what it's going to.
Yeah, it's a great question. So one mechanism here is to think of a continuum. On one extreme where you are doing innovation and reform to people. Mm-hmm. You're the expert, you're delivering it, often across race and class lines, power for sure, those in power delivering solutions to those without. And for much of my career, that was the construct I lived in. Till they bury me, mm-hmm. I will be trying to unpack that. And I'll never escape the reality of that. And yet there were times when 4.0 was squarely
operating in that kind of way.
There's another extreme, which is sort of when Hassan and I think about 10 years from now, we dream of 4.0 being exclusively a function of the alumni and fellows of the program, where the actual staff, the nonprofit, disappears, and there'd be like a community-led, community-owned mechanism mm-hmm. for those who have stepped out as fellows or entrepreneurs. You and your peers would be responsible collectively for deciding what to do with this money. So let's say it was, we spend roughly $2.5 million a year. Right now, I, Hassan, and the team decide when that money goes where.
Sure.
What if you and all the other alumni of 4.0 were handed that responsibility? And not just you, but the fellows. And this like living, breathing thing of 100 new pilots a year. Like every year, there was a mechanism for y'all to welcome that group in for do the training. Like right now, so we're in the middle now. We're in the middle. Hassan has got almost $600,000 of that 2.5 every year is in checks that we write to our alumni to coach and recruit. So, roughly, we're a little, just barely breaking 20% of our P&L being leveraged by off-balance sheet assets. So you and other alumni.
Direct community investment.
Correct. So that's just like a physical, to answer your question, we're trying to go from to to with. Right now we're doing it with. We're trying to embrace this idea of...
Are there a lot of nonprofits that are thinking in these terms? There's such an interesting ecosystem,
Yeah.
Speaking within the Knowles ecosystem, with a lot of folks that we'll work with who are scratching that $250,000 to $500,000 budget.
Yep.
And then you get folks that are your mega nonprofits.
Yeah.
And $2.5 million operating budget is a very healthy way to run programming. And you're doing something that to me seems a little bit unprecedented in literally saying, those trackers where they say how many dollars out of every cent goes directly to the community. You're kind of blowing that out of the water. You're saying, no, we're going to really focus on this, getting the capital directly to the innovators, to the innovation that's happening at the ground level. At your level in the nonprofit ecosystem, is it strange to be doing what you're doing? What does that conversation look like?
It is. There's friction and tension, right? Like, I'm still terrified about whether I'm going to be able to raise the funds to support this, right? And you know what it's like to have people's careers and salaries on your shoulders. That's for I'm selling too every year, right? We're lucky to have some runway, but that runway is always measured in months, not years. Sometimes weeks, and there have been a couple chapters where it was days. And so, but I think there is a conversation that needs to be opened up and needs to be more transparent and honest between those of us who are spending philanthropy and those who are giving it away.
Interesting.
There are a lot of traps that I see philanthropists get into. In fact, I'll just workshop them with you. Hassan and I are workshopping some of these. Some of these traps are, we only invest in what works.
Show us some data.
Let's work through that just for a second. How do you create a dynamic long-term strategy that's oxygenated if the capital is parked in a place that says we only invest in what works? Like that is utterly nonsensical. If you care about what might be the new idea next year or 5 years from now or 10 years. Yeah. Or if you don't have any intellectual honesty about the fact that what you consider working took some gutsy entrepreneur a crazy amount of fear to get over to get it to working.
Are folks looking for hard data? Are they looking for you to run a research program concurrent with whatever you roll out so that they can then go back to their foundation and prove it?
Definitely, which I get. I get that, you know, anybody spending money wants to feel accountable or is accountable to someone. So yeah, the short answer is yes. One of the fun things about where we're at now is we're saying, well, okay, we can't give you year over year, you know, longitudinal data on how well a child's doing in integrated tests in 5 subjects based on this pilot. But you know what we can do is we can baseline demand at the beginning of it. We can ask qualitatively about somebody's perception of that skill, and then within a 2 to 3 hour pop-up, we can collect real data. I'll give you a really good example. So Floor, who you see every day, is the founder of Electric Girls, and we use the example of her pop-up in Essentials to say, okay, here's what I'm going to do in 2 hours with a cohort of 5 to 10 young women ages 12 to 14. I'm going to baseline at the beginning of that how they feel about engineering and how competent they feel in circuit building, and then I'm going to teach them how to use one tool, a wire cutter.
That's it.
It's a 2 hour session. The first hour you're going to learn how to use a wire cutter, and you're going to kick butt at using the wire cutter by the end of that hour. And the second hour, you're going to be able to build anything you want with this new skill.
Single tool.
Single tool. And so this is what's so elegant about this, and Floor's genius here is to say, I have distilled the basic concept of knowledge acquisition and skill building and confidence. And what I love about what Floor is measuring there, you know, you may think that Floor is going to measure how strong the soldering is or how well, you know, that stripping has been. I do a lot of wire stripping in my hobby at night. So like I'm thinking about the wire stripping. It's so easy to say, oh, I can measure that. There's all kinds of math there. You know what Floor's measuring? She's measuring confidence.
Yeah.
And she can measure the change in confidence. She can ask those girls what they think about science before those 2 hours, and she is asking them 2 hours later, and they have suddenly built a skill and confidence, right? And so now we're starting to say, okay, everything we've known and spent 15 or 20 years as educators in measuring used to be, when I was a math teacher, I would measure whether you learned algebra over a year. Exactly. So we're taking all of that sort of latent awareness of data, and we're saying, okay, well, let's just measure something new. And let's measure it here. And let's measure it based on what is this. And this is what's so exciting. Like, my inner teacher is so pumped about being in this community is because for the first time in a long time, and I would say since he was a middle school math teacher, the inner teacher is saying, this is learning. Like, this is Floor understanding and seeing learning, asking what the baseline of it might be, showing the data of 2 hours of really powerful engagement and learning, and telling that story first back to those young women who now become obsessed with Electric Girls. And now their identity is rooted in being part of this community. And then within months, Floor has the girls in that experience now mentoring young women who are only 4, 5, 6 months behind them, right? So now she's creating this. Electric Girls becomes a platform for human beings to interact with each other.
It's a recursive function. It's building on itself in a really powerful way.
And you know what the big distinction is, back to your original question, is like, I have had the same construct of schooling that Webster's has, which is that is an institution. And what I find in people like Floor, what I see in your interactions with high schoolers who fall in love with photography and get this thing that you call craft, like they start to create a sense of pride in their own work, like that is the human side of learning. And it's like, in its simplest form, that's what we're trying to do here, is to just create space for people to speak into the future of school as a human thing, not as an institutional thing.
It's so powerful. I imagine it's so difficult to go back to mega funders and to articulate the value of that. Because I can, we went through organizationally the first round of the Tiny Fellowship, so a beefed up version of Essentials. So instead of that tiny bet, a slightly bigger bet. And I remember going through it, having a lot of conversations with Hassan and Raphael, who were helping facilitate and make everything run at the time, and kind of looking at them and going, are you sure you want us here? Yeah. And Hassan would just nod and smile and go, yeah, of course. I'm like, but are you sure? Like, are you really, like, are we the right fit for this thing? Because it's community, but we're so alien in so many ways. We're informed, both Oli and myself, as business owners, are informed by education in a very profound way, experientially, both, internationally. Him coming from Brazil and me, in New Orleans. And there was definitely that sentiment of, am I in the room doing the right work? Which was almost us subconsciously asking for validation from a 4.0 to say exactly what you've been fighting against, which is, no, it's not our job to tell you what it is that you do. And I think that if we had gone through programming that tried to calcify us too early, we wouldn't be viable as a mission and vision-led organization or as a business. Because if you look at what we came in with, this idea of, I'm just going to go shoot some stuff, teach the craft through a school, and make sure that young folks get paid, has gone through so many iterations where now we focus on a particular age group, 22 to 26, for a different set of reasons that we couldn't even predicted coming into it. This idea of lack of access to arts and lack of access to salaried positions, we had identified over the course of our own, tiny and then post-tiny, that the most fundamental sort of user problem in that Mad Lib you're describing was, how do I pay my bills consistently? Because art is not designed to pay your bills consistently, and it kind of hit us that, we need to provide salaries. So what does the business look like if we have to give salaries to folks? It's funny though, because how do you go to a mega donor and say, hey, we had an apprenticeship program for high schoolers come through, and now what they do is they provide a workforce connection in the arts through an apprenticeship that becomes a full-time job.
Some mega donors don't make the connect, but to their credit, the ones that have, there's also a lot of fatigue in funding, right? There's been a couple decades of investing in, I'm using air quotes, well, I guess you can't see that. I keep forgetting to be filmed. You can get tired of this self-talk, and there are some funders who are like, deep, not even deep, you can just ask them, and they'll say, yeah, I'm kind of tired of funding the same stuff.
Wow.
And I know that this isn't sufficient, right? So there's a discussion going on, and there's goodwill, but there are so many structural barriers in these organizations that have to get millions or billions of dollars out the door. One challenge that I empathize with or sympathize with is, okay, Matt, so let's say I've got to put $100 million out the door, which is just kind of crazy to think about, right? Yeah, somebody has that job. And then if I say, cool, the place where we really need it is $1,000 checks. Like, they can do the math on that. Like, that's 100,000 checks, right? How am I supposed to write 100,000 checks? And so I think one of these conversations that is really interesting with funders is to say, look, we're not asking you to chuck the idea of scaling an idea that might be beneficial. If there's something beneficial and it can scale in an authentic human way that doesn't diminish the role of the consumer in that, then for sure, scale good things. there are a lot fewer things that really qualify when you get deep on it than I think should. And I think our mechanisms for thinking about scale are incredibly lazy in this particular movement.
Because everybody wants the cheapest, fastest.
Well, I think what we do is we think that the way to scale is to give the expert operator all of the control, right? So, for example, if you think about how does, I'm going to use, let's use Airbnb versus Hilton, right? There's a lot of like moral ambiguity in some of these business models. And so I acknowledge that in picking this example. But it took Hilton 100 years to get the same number of room nights that Airbnb took 4 years to get to.
Wow.
And so that's scale and speed. And the basic idea in the business model is that I don't need to own the assets to give people nights of accommodation, right? So Hilton does, and so yes, today Hilton doesn't own all their buildings, but the construct was, I'm a hotel operator, I have a building, and I need that's what it is. And so you stay there, and it's my building. And now, granted, they've evolved, and there's branding and licensing and stuff like that, so they don't own all their buildings that say Hilton on them, but that's the basic idea. And I think, sadly, of the defining constructs of philanthropy and education reform today, it is an undue bias towards the ownership of an idea or a model, and the belief that we'll just give the resource to that entity and it will be like Hilton. It will be a hotel. And so the way to get room nights to children who need room nights is to say, Hilton, go buy as many buildings as you can and put as many Hiltons up as you want.
Follow the traditional model.
And if Hilton, and yes, this is code for insert charter management operator, said, hey, what if I thought about maybe providing room nights in an unconventional way, the way Airbnb does, through assets that aren't on my balance sheet? My worry is that many funders would say, whoa, that's a little scary. Let's just focus on the building.
What are they scared about? So is it a sense of momentum that they go, we have these mega institutions, they're established relationships, it's a question of expanding market in a sense. What's the fear? What does somebody tell you when they look at you and you go?
Myself. So for me, one fear is what we're really trafficking in is power redistribution. And so I think to not acknowledge that many of these mechanisms of funding the improvement of school through mechanisms that are still tightly concentrated and not fundamentally about redistributing power is just one thing to just note. This is it. When we're talking about structure, it is hard. You cannot talk about schooling in America and not talk about structural racism. Like it is, by definition, so much of what determines where a child goes to school, whether that's public or private, or redlining and housing policy, or criminal justice and incarceration and school discipline. Like these things are all connected.
It's interwoven.
They're all interwoven.
The social fabric.
They're all woven in, and I think it is very difficult to come up with a strategy for distributing your money that effectively, even if you wanted to dismantle it and you were aware of that, it's daunting.
Sure.
To say, how do I unbolt all this stuff? And so I think it's just easier, and there's still some marginal benefit to saying, I'm going to pick this Hilton hotel strategy, and at least Hilton's telling me that they can put a lot of buildings up. And for me, just one of the things that I would challenge my colleagues who are saying, give me more money to scale my model in as many places as I can, just be honest about the diseconomies of scale. Right? When I was in business school,
the loss, becoming too much of a Henry Ford model where you lose.
Well, Henry, if you said, Henry, put your imagine how ludicrous it would sound to Henry Ford if someone said, hey, Henry, will you start a factory in California? He'd be like, no, I'm in Detroit.
Yeah.
My costs go down every time I make Detroit more efficient.
Yeah.
And so this is the other thing that bugs me, right? It's like even the folks who built the Industrial Revolution would probably be calling us out as intellectually dishonest or lazy in the ways that we deploy their thinking and business models. And so when I was in business school, right, I remember I loved operations, one of my favorite classes, And I remember the graph of minimum efficient scale being shaped not like an asymptote that goes to 0 to infinity, but as a U. You don't. It's a point in time.
Yes.
When the scale economies and the scale diseconomies are optimized.
The bigger I get, at a certain point, I get more expensive.
Correct. And when you understand the political dynamics of schooling, 14,000 plus school districts in our country.
Wow. Every
time you cross one of those boundaries, you incur new costs. Just basic transaction cost theory, right? It's harder to have operations in a place where the rules are different. Mm-hmm. And every time you add a site, whether it's a neighborhood or a street or a family, like when you take into account the human, that's right. And so what you see in these business models, if you truly understand even the basics of them, is that these are not arithmetic step functions. These are geometric curves that these scale diseconomies grow. They get steeper.
They have to start hoovering up capital to cover
up
the fact.
And so that's what starts to happen. And so that's what you start to see happening.
Is that where we are now?
That is where we are now with a lot of philanthropy. Is that we have become so risk averse and we have become so convinced that the big checks are the ones that matter, that we have given too much room in our thinking to this very dangerous belief in a few things. When in fact, I would just argue that especially in this day and age, like if there's one thing that schools should be good at, it is democratizing and equalizing the playing field.
Keeping it small.
It's the one thing left in, well, this is a little dramatic. It's one of the few things left in our democracy that can bring us together.
A functioning educational system.
Correct, right? Like the school should be the place, could be the place. There are not many other things that could be the place.
The town square is not the town square that it used to be.
Yeah, right. And we can talk about Main Street and Wall Street and all that.
We've got all
K
the
Street and all the streets. But, I do believe that, like, at its core, that is one thing that we can look to optimistically. And again, do I think seven-figure checks matter? Totally. I just think that the connection between a $7 check that would make someone really proud to cut and the 3-figure check, that is a very real connection that we have never taken enough time to study and to build. And if we can build a healthy relationship, a healthy construct, a healthy dialogue, a healthy pathway from the 3-figure check to the 4-figure check to the 5-figure check to the 6-figure check to the 7-figure check, we could do two things. We could A, speak into this discussion about how inaccessible innovation and reform has been in this field. It has been a privileged game. Entrepreneurship in the U.S.
To even participate in
entrepreneurship writ large is a privileged game. By definition, right? It is the idea that you can afford to make a mistake.
Yeah.
And in other industries, the Valley has done this well. There are 3 and 4 and 5-figure checks in abundance. And the cultural norm is give it a try.
Yes.
Right? Your resume has a failed startup that you spent 10 grand on. Bonus.
Yeah.
In education, you try something and it didn't work, shame on you for putting kids at risk.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot sort of in the ether and in our mythology and our culture that good intentions, I don't want to jeopardize children's lives.
Exactly.
But when you see Floor running a 2-hour experiment on electric girls
and see the immediate response,
the potential there, right? The potential for that this is in Essentials where we write a $300 check for Floor to try that.
Yeah.
The potential of that $300 risk bet trial to become what Electric Girls is today. Why would you not make that bet?
Uncanny.
Why would you do if I gave you $1 million, why wouldn't you spend 100 of it to 100,000? Right. Exactly.
I think
on that many $1,000 experiments.
That's got to be the ultimate example. And Floor was part of our third. She was our third interviewee, so we got the whole backstory and the whole rundown. And I remember her. Well, just this summer, her summer camp was fully sponsored by Shell, and she negotiated it like a pro.
Sure did.
and did a beautiful job of retaining the integrity of the organization, and they cut her a 5-figure check to run this amazing program.
That's right.
And just to connect it to that nucleus of a $300 bet becomes a fully operational nonprofit that is operating summer camps, pop-ups, all these little side events in the community is really the heart of it. Now, we could go for days on this.
We could, right?
We've hit the 50 minutes. We've gone 5 minutes over our standard call.
No, but that's a good place to finish, right? Because it's like this is the distinction is simple. This is either a human endeavor or it's an institutional one. And like what I love about what you've done with your organization is, yes, there is a focus on where you're going to live, but it's because you understood the human need of the people that you want to serve, and you've made a great company around that focus. So there's nothing wrong with focusing. There's nothing wrong with being an expert. The question is whether your expertise is going to be defined and informed by human need or by some, unfortunately, very lazy in our world, theories about what makes great institutions and how institutional impact is leveraged. And that's sadly where our thinking is today. And I think if we can have more folks shifting and flipping the conversation to say, let's start with the humanity at the core of this.
Yes.
We might actually be back closer to what school could be all about, what the promise of school in this particular democracy really, I think, could be and needs to be. So anyway.
That's a great place to wrap it. I don't know how to sum it up better.
Cool, thanks. This is super fun.
Thank you for the time. We really appreciate you jumping in and being part of this little adventure that we're having.